This is Scott the Fix-It Guy. Our goal with our videos is to empower you to be able to do the repairs on your own and save a whole lot of money and also get that great feeling of having fixed it by yourself.
Today we have a gas dryer that isn't heating. This is a Frigidaire Gallery gas dryer, but this is going to work for almost all gas dryers. We're going to try a couple things, test some things. So right now I've pressed it on the door switch. I'm just making sure that it's spinning. And when I reach in though to feel for heat near the back, there's no heat being produced. So this is going to be a video that'll help you try and figure out why your dryer isn't heating. I'm checking this lint filter first. It's pretty clogged. So I'll clean that. I'm going to reach in and clean this slided area where the lint filter goes. Get rid of as much lint as I can. And then I'm also going to check the dryer vent tube that leads from the dryer to the outside. If they get too full of lint, it can prevent some of the heat from leaving the dryer. And there's a device inside the dryer that will turn off the heating mechanism so that the dryer doesn't overheat. So that's something to check. So I'm just pulling off the lint, the dryer vent tube, and just checking for lint. This one does have some lint inside, so I'm going to use a tool made by linteater.com. You can get these at Amazon. You hook them up to your drill, and they're kind of like a bottle brush. They go in and they spin, and they loosen up all the lint, but as you pull the brush back out, it brings all the lint back with you. Be good to wear a dust mask when you do this, though, because it does produce a fair amount of dust. But that may be what's keeping your dryer from heating. So if you get all that lint out of there and put it all back together, you could test it and see if there's any difference. If that still doesn't work, there may be a part inside the dryer that we have to replace, which is pretty easy to do. On this dryer, I use a screwdriver to press in on a couple of clips so I can hinge the lid up, the top part. I'm going to disconnect this modular connector, and then there's a couple of Phillips head screws I have to remove right here that are holding on the front panel. Most dryers have a similar type of arrangement, but they all come apart a little bit differently, and there's plenty of good videos on YouTube that'll show you for your particular dryer how to take the front panel off. But once you get the front panel off, you can get to a lot of the parts. So this one, the front panel hinges back toward me, and I can lift it up off of the clips on the bottom. Now I have good access to all the parts I need to check. So I'm going to use this thing called a multimeter. This only costs about $8 on Amazon, but it allows me to see if electricity can flow through some of these parts. And if they can't, the dryer won't work. I'm testing the outside terminals on this piece, which is called the thermostat. You should get a reading. If you're using a sound reading, you'll hear a beep, and that means electrons can flow through the thermostat. It's not the thermostat, so that one sounds good. This part back here is called the flame sensor. I'm going to put my probes on these gold pieces, these terminals, and you should hear a beep, and that means electricity can flow through the flame sensor. If you don't, then that means you need a new flame sensor, which is kind of rare. It's a rare thing. Thermostat's a rare thing that goes out. Flame sensor's a rare thing that would go out. Another thing you could check too is the igniter. And the igniter is something that glows really hot, and it ignites the gas. And the igniter you can check in the same way. We'll show you here in the video here in a second, but you're going to separate modular connector, and then you're going to put your terminals on part of the igniter. I'm just cutting a little zip tie here that's holding the wires together. And this is the modular connector here I'm holding in my thumb. I'm going to separate these two halves. Then I'll take my multimeter, I'll put the probes on the wires at the end of the igniter that we'll see here in this photo. So here's the igniter. You can see these wires. At the end of it, there's a modular connector. I'm going to put my probes there, and I should get a reading of resistance and a beep. If not, you may need a new igniter, which is easy to replace. And then another thing you could check too is the high limit. So I'm just testing that igniter, and it does get a reading, so I know it does have continuity. It is working. Another thing is called the high limit, and that's a thing that when it gets too hot, it will cut power to the heating mechanism to protect the dryer from fire. And this one lives up here in the upper right hand corner. So I'm going to put my meter on these two silver terminals and see if I get a beep. If I don't get a beep, then I know that the high limit is tripped and I just have to replace it, which is again pretty easy to do. So I did get a beep. So all the components are working. There's only one thing really left on this dryer, and that's the primary and secondary gas coil. So I'm going to replace those. They're pretty cheap. You can get those at Amazon also. And they're often just called gas coils. We'll see a picture of it here coming up. But they're just solenoids. They're copper wire. And when they get 110 volts, they make a really powerful magnetic field. And they lift a little pin, which lets gas flow. But when they don't work anymore, the gas never flows. So I'm taking the bracket off. I'm going to pull the old gas coils off. It's actually pretty easy to do. And I'll go ahead and put the new ones on and put the bracket back on. And all gas dryers have these little gas coils, and they're kind of universal. Almost all of them can use the same brand, with the exception of LG, which uses a different type. But this is a common one that stops working and will either make your dryer not heat very well or not heat at all. So in this case, it wasn't heating at all due to these gas coils being so worn out. Here's a part number. And again, these gas coils will work on your dryer too, unless it's an LG, which uses a different kind. So I'm going to go ahead and just put those on. This bigger one, I'm going to have the terminals down at the bottom, and then the skinnier one, I'm going to have the terminals up at the top. They go onto the two different posts, and then I'll put the bracket back on to hold it. It's only being held on by two Phillips head screws. So there's the bracket. I'll kind of move those around until they fit in. I'll put the two screws in there, tighten them up. And then I'll put the modular connectors back on that are sending power to the primary and secondary gas coils. And then I'm just going to button this machine back up, put it back together. But we did figure out what it was finally. It was the gas coils, which is very common. Also, the igniter is fairly common, and the high limit is very common. The flame sensor is not common, and the thermostat is a not common problem. It could be in your case, but it's pretty rare. I would suspect gas coils or the high limit. So I'm testing this now. I've got the front panel up on top of the dryer, hooked up the modular connector, disconnected the belt, and turned it on, and it did heat. So now I know I did it correctly. So I put the front panel back on, tightening up the two Phillips head screws. I'm going to put the power modular connector back together and then put the top down and test it. Most of these parts probably go 4 or 5 years before they stop working. So if your dryer is maybe 5 years old and you're noticing it isn't heating as well or not heating at all, you can do these tests. You just really need that cheap multimeter, multi-tester to run these tests. And just a couple of simple tools. So this is on a GE Frigidaire Gallery gas dryer, but again, they all have kind of similar systems. So we set it for time dry, start it, and we did get heat. So that did cure the problem. Hopefully this will help you with your gas dryer, and thanks so much for watching, and please subscribe when you get a chance. Thanks again.